So, you've decided you want to have a baby and you're ready to get rid of all your exogenous hormones, which up until this point have prevented said pregnancy. But when is the right time to remove your contraception? How will your fertility be affected? And how long will it take you to get pregnant? Well, sit back and relax, because I've done the research for you to contemplate on. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Naomi Cave and welcome to Know Her, a cosy part of the internet where we get to know her, the female body. If you enjoy this content, kindly like and subscribe. It encourages me to make more videos. And if there's any topics you'd like me to discuss or do a deep dive into, then make sure to put them down below in the comment section and I'll get to it. Thank you so much for all your support, and I hope your new year is starting off to an amazing start. So nearly 1/5 of all women use hormonal contraception worldwide as of an article in 2019. I'm sure this has changed drastically in the last now 5 years. Can you believe 2019 was 5 years ago? But that means there are a few of you who are on hormonal contraception and are considering having children and are wondering when the right time to remove the contraception and start trying for a baby is. Before we get started, I just want to go through the basics of conception. Conception starts when sperm meets egg. The sperm travels through the vagina, through the cervix, into the womb, and normally meets the egg by the fallopian tube. It's here where it fertilizes the egg that will turn into a baby. For most couples who have sex regularly and are under the age of 40, you can expect about an 8 out of 10 chance of having a successful pregnancy within 1 year. The NHS describes regular sex as having sex every 2 to 3 days in a month. There is a caveat here, however, because women over the age of 35 are more likely to have chromosomal abnormalities, they're more likely to have miscarriages, and they're more likely to have obstetric complications. So the sooner you start, the better. I would also at this point like to introduce you to a word called fecundability. So fecundability is the probability of having a successful pregnancy within one menstrual cycle. So each time that you ovulate, what is the probability that that egg will be fertilized by sperm and it will go on to a pregnancy? The fecundability is of course based on age, but it's about 20 to 25%. So you have a 25% chance of becoming pregnant within 1 month. And 25% seems quite low to me because it always seemed like the minute you have unprotected sex, you will get pregnant. But actually, the reality is it can take couples a couple of months up to a year in order to achieve pregnancy. I say all these things because getting pregnant is actually not that easy. But that's not to say you should get rid of your contraception and risk it and hope for the best, because if you really don't want to have a child, then use contraception, whether that be hormonal or otherwise. To answer the question, when is the right time to remove your contraception, how long will it take for your fertility to return to normal after contraception, and how long will it take to get pregnant, I'm going to be focusing on one study. Okay, let's try this again. I apologise for the difference in light. It has been a journey. It's a bit later on in the day and the sun has set, so I'm using artificial light, which just makes my face look uber shiny. But forget that, let's get into this study. So this study recruited over 17,000 women and there were 10,000 births that were documented. On average, in 6 months, 66% of women were able to conceive, and in a year, 12 months, it was about 77%. So this is slightly lower than what the NHS deem as normal, which is about 80%, 8 out of 10 couples being able to conceive. First, we're going to talk about delays in return to fertility. Of all the types of contraceptions that were used, it was the injectable contraception called the depo that had the longest delay in return to fertility. So the depo injection is a progesterone-only injection that is given every 3 months. In the study, it was noted that the delay to return to fertility was about 5 to 8 months. Following the injection, it was the patch that had the longest delay in return to fertility, being about 4 months on average. Followed by that, it was the oral contraception and the vaginal ring, which was about 3 months for return to fertility. Lastly, it was the IUD, both hormonal and copper, which had the lowest delays in return to fertility, being about 2 months. Now that we've spoken about the delays in return to fertility, we're going to discuss fecundability. As I said, fecundability is the probability of having a pregnancy in one menstrual cycle. So we're going to start with the injection, the depo injection, the one that had the longest delays in return to fertility. When looking at people who were using the depo injection, they were more likely to be overweight, they were more likely to have irregular periods, they were more likely to be smokers, and thus they were more likely to have things like type 2 diabetes. People who used the depo injection were also less likely to make amendments to try and improve their chances of conceiving, so things like weight loss, quitting smoking, things like that. When looking at fecundability, this was seen to be decreased when compared to those who had used the barrier method. So the fecundability ratio was about 0.65. But as I said, women who were using the depo injection were also more likely to have other risk factors that could delay pregnancy. So what the paper did is they adjusted for this, and even after adjusting for it, they noticed that the fecundability was lower in women who had the depo injection when compared to the barrier method. The NICE guidelines says that we should tell patients that it can take up to a year for fertility to return. So if you are planning on having a child within a year, I would say now is a good time to start thinking about stopping the depo injection and thinking about different forms of contraception, perhaps the barrier method for a year. One thing that this study did not do very well is it did not actually ask the participants when their last depo injection was. So I guess it's kind of difficult to know exactly how long the delay in return to fertility was and what the impact on the fecundability was as a result. Next, let's talk about the hormonal IUD. So this, like the injection, was compared against those using barrier methods, and they looked at the probability of having a successful pregnancy within one cycle. They found that this fecundability ratio was actually higher for women who had used the intrauterine device, such as the hormonal contraception, but also for the copper coil. The fecundability ratio was 1.23. If I'm right, it means a 23% greater chance of having a baby within 1 month if you were on the hormonal IUD prior. What they found is women who use long-term contraceptives were also more likely to have had children in the past, so they already had proven track record of having good fertility, and therefore it will be easier for them to get pregnant again this time. The study did, however, adjust for that, and instead of 1.23, the fecundability ratio went down to 1.14. So there's still a bit of a higher fecundability when compared to the barrier method for those who used the hormonal IUD. For the copper coil, this was 1.19. When looking at the length of use and how that affected the probability of having a successful pregnancy, the study found there was no decrease in fecundability. So it didn't matter if someone had been using contraception for 10 years or for 5 years, there was no decrease in the probability of a successful pregnancy. The only caveat is the oral contraception, which did show that when used for less time compared to being used for longer periods of time, the fecundability did decrease slightly. So they looked at women who had used the oral contraception for 2 years or less, and women who had used the oral contraception for 5 years or more, and people who used the contraception for 5 years or more fared better. So that's the data, that's the information. You will experience some delays if you've used hormonal contraception, but the longest delays will come from injectables such as the progesterone-only pill. Shorter delays will come from things like the IUD, copper and hormonal, and also the implant. And everything else is about 4 months or less. In terms of being on contraception for a long period of time, that does not affect the probability of you having a successful pregnancy. It is important to note, however, if you are on things like the injectable contraception, then you should probably get off it sooner rather than later if you are thinking about starting a family. One thing to note is that if people came off contraception and immediately got pregnant in the first month, it's unlikely that they would have participated in the study. So you have to take it all with a pinch of salt. The study is not 100% perfect, but it does give you some insight on how long it might take for you to get pregnant, when to think about removing your contraception. And it was really interesting for me to read. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions or any things you'd like to discuss, then put a comment down below and we'll get to it in another video. But until next time, bye!